The date was April 20th, 1945, not April 8th history. Doesn't grant us the luxury of round numbers when recording its harshest moments. The location, the outskirts of Aachen, Germany. Specifically, the Mershausen district. The temperature hung just above freezing. A thin rain, the kind that seeps through wool uniforms and settles into bone fell in persistent sheets across the devastated landscape. By this point in the war, the landscape itself looked traumatized, pockmarked by artillery, stripped of trees. The earth had been turned over so many times that it no longer resembled soil. It resembled scar tissue. The boy's name was Helmut Altmann. He was 16 years old, 5'6", 123 pounds. His Hitler Youth identification papers, still crisp, still official, despite everything crumbling around him, listed his birth date as March 14, 1929. The documentation noted his exceptional commitment to the Reich. What the papers didn't mention was that his hands trembled. What they didn't record was that he'd vomited twice that morning from nerves. Helmut stood in a concrete bunker with 7 other teenagers and 2 Wehrmacht officers' men, who weren't much older than the boys themselves, really. Major Klaus Ferner, age 28, commanded the position. His face bore the particular exhaustion of someone who'd been fighting since 1941. He had 3 fingers missing on his left hand. He held a rifle in his right anyway. The American advance was coming. Everyone knew it. You could hear it in the way the ground trembled. Not just from distant artillery, the trembling was getting closer. Closer every hour. By dawn, it would be meters away. They'll come from the east, Ferner had told the boys the night before. His voice was flat, devoid of conviction. We hold the position until reinforcements arrive. No one asked when those reinforcements might arrive. Everyone already knew the answer. They weren't coming. The entire Eastern Front had collapsed. The Soviets were in Berlin. Berlin, the capital, the heart. And yet, here they were in a bunker outside Aachen, defending a position that no longer mattered for a cause that had already died. Helmut's rifle was a Kar 9 8K, standard issue for Wehrmacht infantry. It was heavier than he remembered it being. His shoulder ached from the recoil during target practice 3 days ago. 3 days. That felt like another lifetime. He'd practiced shooting at paper targets with concentric circles. The instructors had praised his aim. Steady hand, they'd said. Good for the Reich. Now, looking down at his hands in the pre-dawn darkness, he couldn't imagine them being steady for anything. The bunker smelled of concrete dust, cigarette smoke, and sweat. Lots of sweat. Fear has a smell acrid, sharp, unmistakable. It pooled in the corners of the bunker like water. Another boy, Friedrich, stood beside Helmut. Friedrich was 17. They'd been in the same Hitler Youth unit for 3 years. Friedrich had memorized every speech, passed every physical test, sung every marching song with genuine fervor. Friedrich believed, or at least Friedrich had believed. Now, in the darkness of the bunker, Friedrich's eyes looked hollow, empty, like someone had reached in and taken the belief out, leaving only the shell. What if we can't stop them? Friedrich whispered. Helmut didn't answer. The answer was written across every surface, the crumbling buildings visible through the observation slits, the ash that fell like snow from distant fires, the maps pinned to the bunker walls, showing the steady, inexorable American advance. They couldn't stop them. Helmut understood this with absolute clarity. The Americans had factories. The Americans had supplies. The Americans had men, fresh men, well-fed men, men who believed they were fighting for something that still existed. The Hitler Youth had rifles and conviction, or what remained of conviction. In the pre-dawn darkness, even conviction felt like a lie they'd all agreed to tell each other. Major Ferner appeared in the doorway of the observation post. His one functional hand gripped the doorframe. "Listen," he said. His voice carried no rank in it, no authority. just tiredness. When they come, you fire. You fire at what moves. You don't think about what happens after. You don't think about anything except the firing. Do you understand? 8 pairs of eyes, teenage eyes, still possessing the biological clarity of youth, even if everything else had been stripped away, looked back at him. Do you understand? He repeated. "Ja, Major," they chorused. He nodded. He didn't look convinced. He looked like a man fulfilling an obligation to a structure that no longer existed. The first shot came at 6:47 a.m. It wasn't from inside the bunker. It was from outside. A single rifle shot from somewhere to the northwest. Then another. Then a burst of machine gun fire. And then suddenly, impossibly, all at once, the world became noise. Helmut pressed his face against the concrete. His heart was doing something his chest couldn't contain. It was trying to escape. It was trying to leave his body behind and run. This was it. This was the moment. This was when it became real. This was when Helmut Altmann, 16-year-old Hitler Youth soldier, stepped across the threshold from training into combat. And everything he thought he knew about himself, about courage, about fear, about sacrifice, about the state he'd pledged his life to, was about to be shattered. The bunker became a chamber of chaos. Not chaos in the abstract sense, not disorder or confusion. It was worse. It was orchestrated chaos, systematic. The Americans were professionals. They'd learned how to break defensive positions. They did it with mathematical precision. The machine gun fire swept across the observation slits like a scythe. Concrete chips exploded inward, each one a small projectile. Friedrich screamed, not words, just sound, and threw himself against the far wall. Another boy, Wilhelm, younger than the rest at just 15, dropped his rifle and covered his head with his hands as if that would stop bullets. Return fire. Ferner was shouting. Return fire. Maintain discipline. But there was no discipline. There was only animal panic wearing a Wehrmacht uniform. Helmut found himself on the floor. He didn't remember falling. His rifle lay beside him. The safety was still on. His fingers moved with mechanical, precision-learned muscle memory from hundreds of drills inflicted to the fire position. He rose to one knee. He aimed through the observation slit. What he saw defied comprehension. The street below the bunker was flooding with American soldiers. Not in neat formations and tactical patterns, spread across rubble, moving from cover point to cover point with practiced efficiency. They wore camouflage that actually worked. They moved like men who'd done this before, many times. They moved like men who knew they would likely survive. Helmut fired. The rifle kicked his shoulder. The round went downrange. He had no idea if he hit anything. He worked the bolt, another muscle memory action, and fired again and again. The rifle became an extension of his panic, converting terror into rounds per minute. Beside him, Friedrich was firing too, his jaw clenched so hard the muscles bulged beneath the skin. Behind them, Major Ferner worked his rifle one-handed, the barrel steady despite the missing fingers, his aim true and practiced, and utterly futile against the tide of men pouring toward the bunker. "Grenades!" someone screamed. "Grenades on the position!" The first one landed on the roof of the bunker. The explosion was not loud. Helmut would remember this detail forever. It was not loud. It was complete. It filled everything. It was the sound of the world ending, concentrated into a single moment. Dust cascaded from the ceiling. A support beam cracked. The light stew bare bulbs strung on wire swayed, and one of them shattered. "They're coming in!" Wilhelm was standing now, pressed against the concrete wall, his young face contorted. "They're coming in! They're coming in! They're—" The sound of boots on metal, on the blast doors. They were trying the main entrance. Ferner made a decision. There was no consultation, no democratic discussion. He simply raised his hand and pointed to the back tunnel, the escape route that theoretically led to a secondary position 300 meters north. "Go," he said to the Hitler Youth. "All of you. Now." Sir Friedrich started to protest. "Now." Ferner's voice cracked like a whip. "Move." They moved. Wilhelm first, scrambling into the darkness of the rear tunnel like a hunted animal. Friedrich went next, then three others whose names Helmut would never quite remember afterward. Their faces would blur in his memory, but this moment of abandonment, of surviving, because an officer had calculated the mathematics of sacrifice, this would remain crystalline. Helmut turned to follow. He looked back once. Ferner was standing in the main chamber, alone now except for Unteroffizier Steiger, the senior enlisted man. Ferner was reloading his rifle. Steiger was setting charges on the ammunition stores. They weren't leaving. They were staying to buy time. They were staying because that's what German officers did. They held the line and died holding it. "Go!" Ferner shouted, seeing Helmut's hesitation. Helmut went. The tunnel was concrete and darkness. The sounds of combat echoed through it: gunfire, explosions, voices shouting in English and German. His eyes adjusted slowly. He could see Friedrich's silhouette ahead, moving at a crouch. Behind them, the sound of the main bunker entrance being breached, boots on concrete. Americans inside. Then a sound that would haunt Helmut for the rest of his life. The crack of rifle fire from inside the bunker. Ferner, taking shots at Americans in the darkness. The exchange lasted maybe 15 seconds. Then it stopped. The bunker had gone quiet except for the thud of boots. The escape tunnel led upward, steps carved into concrete. Wilhelm was already at the top, emerging into gray morning light. Friedrich was 3 steps ahead of Helmut. The tunnel opened into what had once been a basement of a ruined house. Windows empty of glass and frames looked out onto a street that was no longer a street. It was a battlefield. "This way," Friedrich hissed, and they moved forward into the rubble maze. That's when the second American assault came not from behind, but from ahead. From the direction they were moving. A patrol, maybe 5 soldiers, emerging from behind a destroyed wall. They saw the 2 Hitler Youth at almost the same moment the Hitler Youth saw them. Time compressed. It became a series of still frames. American rifles coming up. Friedrich raising his car, 9.8K. Helmut doing the same. The American in front, a sergeant, maybe 30 years old, with sergeant's stripes and eyes that had seen too much seeming to hesitate for just a fraction of a second. A fraction of a second was not enough. Friedrich fired first. The round went wide. An American fired back. The sound was like nothing Helmut's ears had prepared him for, not the same as their rifles, but sharper, more staccato. An M1 Garand. Helmut knew the sound from recognition manuals. Wilhelm screamed. Blood bloomed across his left side. He fell backward into rubble, his rifle clattering away. "Run!" Friedrich grabbed Helmut's arm. They ran. Not away from the Americans. There was nowhere to run away to. They ran perpendicular, away from the street, into the maze of destroyed buildings. Their boots echoed on concrete. Behind them, American voices. Behind them, the sound of pursuit. Helmut's lungs burned. His legs moved without his mind directing them. Survival had taken over. The philosophical Hitler Youth, the believer in the Reich, the boy who'd memorized speeches about sacrifice and honor, that version of Helmut was gone. What remained was something more primal, something that wanted to live. They burst through what had once been a window into another basement. Friedrich collapsed against the wall, breathing hard, his face streaming sweat despite the cold. "Are they still coming?" Helmut asked. Friedrich looked out through the window frame. "I think we lost them," he whispered. "I think—" The flashbang grenade came through the window first. It landed at their feet. Helmut had just enough time to register what it was before the world became white. pure white. The sound was physical. It seemed to flatten him against the wall. His ears rang with a frequency that transcended sound and became pure pain. His vision was nothing but white and shapes made of light. Then hands grabbing him, hands that were not gentle. A voice, distorted and echoing through the ringing in his ears, speaking English. English words he didn't understand because his mind wasn't processing language anymore. It was processing only survival. He tried to resist. His body moved on instinct. A rifle butt came up and connected with his stomach. The air expelled from his lungs. He doubled over. Someone was shouting. Multiple voices. He saw Friedrich being forced onto the ground. Zip ties plastic restraints being applied to Friedrich's wrists. Then the same for him, his hands secured behind his back. His rifle gone. His freedom gone. The bag came down over his head. Darkness inside and darkness outside. A voice American, crisp, efficient. We got 2 Hitler Youth. One presumed Kiar in the bunker. Another voice. Transport them to holding. Command needs to interrogate them. Hands propelled him forward. Each step was taken blind. Each moment was an exercise in surrendering control to forces beyond comprehension. Helmut Altmann, 16-year-old soldier of the Third Reich, had just crossed another threshold. He was no longer a combatant. He was a prisoner. And the Americans who'd captured him had no ID, absolutely no ID, of what they'd actually taken into custody that morning. The truck bed smelled of gasoline and rust. The canvas cover let in slats of morning light that cut across the darkness like interrogation beams. Helmut couldn't see Friedrich clearly anymore. They'd been separated during processing, but he could hear him. Breathing, shifting, the sound of plastic restraints, creaking against wrists. There were others in the truck. How many? Helmut couldn't determine. Maybe 4. Maybe 6. Voices spoke in whispered German, but not the sharp German of soldiers. This was the German of men in shock. The German of teenagers realizing they'd survived something and had no framework for what came next. The truck lurched into motion. Each pothole sent jolts through the wooden bed. One of the other prisoners older, maybe 18 or 19, groaned softly. Someone else was crying. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just the quiet, continuous sound of someone whose emotional regulation had been completely overwhelmed. Where are they taking us? Friedrich's voice cut through the semi-darkness. He was trying to sound calm. He wasn't succeeding. Camp, probably, the older boy said. His name was Dietrich. He looked like he'd been captured maybe a week ago. His uniform was dirtier, his face more hollow. Prisoner of war camp. The Americans are professionalizing this. No more massacres. They want prisoners now. For interrogation, another voice added. Close. Younger than Dietrich, but older than Helmut or Friedrich. They want to know about defenses, about troop movements, about the Reich. The Reich doesn't exist anymore, someone whispered. No one corrected them. The journey lasted what felt like hours. Helmut tried to track time by the sun's movement across the canvas, but it was impossible. The landscape outside was a blur of movement and rubble, and American soldiers. Occasionally, the truck would stop presumably at checkpoints, and Helmut would hear muffled conversations in English. Once, he heard laughter, American laughter. The sound was almost incomprehensible. How could anyone laugh right now? Then the truck stopped moving altogether. The engine cut off. Voices outside. More English, efficient, professional. The canvas flap was pulled back, and light flooded the truck bed. A figure in an olive drab uniform stood silhouetted against the brightness. His rank insignia caught the light, a captain. Out, he said simply. One at a time, careful with the step. We don't need anybody breaking an ankle. They were led still hooded, still restrained across uneven ground. Helmut could feel it beneath his feet. Packed earth, gravel, the texture of a military camp in construction. Around them, the sounds of organized chaos, vehicles moving, men shouting orders, the clang of metal on metal. They were being processed into the American war machine. The hood came off in a tent. A canvas tent, military issue, with a single electric light bulb hanging from a wire. Behind a folding table sat a man in captain's insignia. His name tape read Harrison. He had the kind of face that suggested he'd been an accountant or an insurance adjuster before the war. Precise, methodical, not unkind, but profoundly disinterested in anything except information. Name? He asked, looking at Helmut. Helmut Altmann. Age? 16. Harrison's pen paused for a microsecond. Just a fraction of a second, but Helmut caught it. This piece of information, the age had registered as something worth noting. Unit? Hitler Youth Battalion, Aachen Defensive Sector. How long were you in combat? This morning. For maybe 20 minutes before we withdrew to secondary position. Did you kill anyone? The question hung in the tent like poison gas. Helmut thought about the American soldiers he'd fired at. Had any of his rounds found their target? Had he killed someone? Had he sent a round downrange that had ended a man's life? I don't know, Helmut said. The truth sounded weak. Harrison wrote something on his form. He didn't look up. You're being transferred to Camp Chesterfield. It's a prisoner of war holding facility about 50 kilometers north. You'll be processed there for transfer to a more permanent facility. You'll be treated according to the Geneva Conventions. You'll be fed. You'll be given medical attention if needed. You will not be mistreated. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Do you have any medical needs I should know about? Helmut thought about the ache in his shoulder, the trembling in his hands, the way his heart kept trying to escape his chest. No, sir. Very well. You'll be taken to Holding Area 3. Next. That was it. The entire interrogation. Helmut was escorted out by an MP military police, identified by the band around his arm, and led to a compound of wire enclosures. Dozens of prisoners were already there. German soldiers, Hitler Youth, members of the Wehrmacht and SS, all of them in various states of shock, exhaustion, and despair. Friedrich was in the same enclosure. They found each other without speaking, and sat together on the ground. Did they ask you anything? Friedrich asked. Just my name, my age, my unit. Same, Friedrich said. He paused. Helmut, I think the war is over. The statement hung between them. It was obvious. It was undeniable. And yet, saying it out loud, acknowledging it in words, felt like a kind of betrayal. What happens now? Helmut asked. Friedrich didn't answer. He looked at the wire fence, at the American guards positioned every 50 meters, at the other prisoners, at the tent where interrogations were happening, at the machinery of military justice grinding forward. I don't know, Friedrich finally said. I think we try to survive whatever comes next. The night fell, a cold night. The prisoners huddled together for warmth, their bodies creating small pockets of heat in the freezing air. Around them, guards walked their routes. Overhead, the stars were brilliant and pitiless, and utterly indifferent to the suffering of 16-year-old boys in wire enclosures. Helmut tried to sleep. He couldn't. Instead, he thought about Major Ferner, about Unteroffizier Steiger, about the flashbang grenade and the moment everything changed, about Wilhelm lying in the rubble, bleeding, about the moment he'd crossed from soldier to prisoner. But there was something else, something that gnawed at him, something that didn't make sense. The American Captain Harrison had paused when Helmut said his age. Why would that matter? Why would a 16-year-old prisoner of war warrant a pause in processing? In the darkness of the wire enclosure, surrounded by the breathing of other captured soldiers, Helmut had no way of knowing that the pause meant something, that someone in the American intelligence apparatus had just flagged a piece of information that would change his entire trajectory. Someone, somewhere in the American command structure, was about to become very interested in Helmut Altmann. Because Helmut Altmann wasn't just a Hitler Youth soldier. Helmut Altmann was something else entirely. Something that, once discovered, would shatter everything both sides thought they understood about how the war had been fought. Camp Chesterfield was a revelation in the wrong direction. It wasn't a prison in the classical sense. There were no cells, no iron bars, no medieval dungeons. Instead, there were compounds, large, open areas enclosed by chain-link fencing and guard towers. The American way of war, Helmut was learning, extended even to captivity. Everything was organized. Everything was documented. Everything was processed. The intake took 3 hours. Helmut was stripped, searched, deloused with powder that smelled of chemicals and institutional disregard, and issued a prisoner of war identification number, 447 to 892. He would no longer be Helmut Altmann. He would be 447 to 892. Numbers were cleaner than names. Numbers didn't require you to think about the person attached to them. He was given a uniform American olive drab, marked with a large PW, stenciled on the back in white paint. The message was clear. You are property. You are categorized. You are processed. The interrogation tent at Camp Chesterfield was more sophisticated than the one at the collection point. There was a table, a chair for the interrogator, a chair for the prisoner, a light directed at the prisoner's face, not painfully bright, just bright enough to be uncomfortable. A translator stood to the side. This was the American military apparatus in its organized form. The interrogator's name was Major Richard Callahan. He looked like he could have been an academic intelligent eyes, a precise way of speaking, the kind of man who'd worked in espionage or military intelligence before the war. He had Helmut's file in front of him, a file that had somehow grown substantially between the initial intake and this interrogation. Helmut Altmann, Callahan said, reading from the file. Born March 14th, 1929, Munich. You're from Munich? Yes, sir. And you joined the Hitler Youth at what age? 10, sir, in 1939. Callahan made a note. He didn't look up. You were in the regular Hitler Youth Battalion for how long? Until I was 15, sir. Then I was transferred. There it was. The lie. Not a spoken lie. Helmut hadn't said anything that wasn't true, but an omission, a deliberate vagueness. He'd been transferred. The file said transferred, but it didn't say where. It didn't say why. Callahan's pen stopped moving. He looked up from the file. His eyes met Helmut's. Transferred to where, exactly? Helmut's mouth went dry. He was 16 years old. He'd been in combat for 20 minutes. He was wearing a uniform marked PW. He was in a military camp under American guard, and he was about to make a decision that would define everything that came after. I can't say, sir, Helmut said quietly. Callahan set down his pen. He leaned back in his chair. The sound it made, a small creak, seemed amplified in the tent. You can't say why not. Because it's classified. By whom? By the Reich. Callahan smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who just confirmed something he suspected. The Reich is finished, Helmut. Berlin has fallen. Hitler is dead. The government you served no longer exists. So I'll ask you again. Transferred to where? Helmut didn't answer. He'd been trained for this. Not by the Wehrmacht, by another organization entirely. An organization that didn't officially exist. An organization that took the brightest, most ideologically committed young men from the Hitler Youth and trained them for work that couldn't be discussed. I need to speak to someone in authority, Helmut said. Someone with clearance. Callahan's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. Recognition. Confirmation. This boy, this 16-year-old, in a prisoner of war. Uniform had just announced that he possessed information valuable enough to require clearance. I see, Callahan said slowly. He stood. Wait here. The interrogation tent became a waiting room. Hours passed. Helmut sat in the chair under the bright light. He didn't move. He didn't ask for water. He simply sat, understanding that he'd crossed a threshold that couldn't be uncrossed. When Callahan returned, he was no longer alone. With him came a man in a different uniform, not American military. Something else, something gray and nondescript. The man had the kind of face that existed to be forgotten. He was maybe 50, maybe 40, maybe 60. He was all of these ages at once. I'm Colonel Werner, the man said. His accent was slight German, but German spoken after years of living somewhere else. I work in military intelligence. Major Callahan tells me you claim to have classified information. I claim nothing, sir, Helmut said carefully. But I have information, and I won't discuss it unless I'm speaking to someone with the proper clearance. Werner pulled up a chair. He sat directly across from Helmut, close enough that Helmut could see the faint scars on his face. Old scars. From another war, maybe. Where were you transferred, Helmut? Helmut didn't answer. But Werner wasn't waiting for him to speak. Werner opened a folder with a black cover. A folder marked with stamps that even Helmut could recognize as indicating the highest levels of classification. Inside the folder were photographs. Werner showed them one by one. They were photographs of military installations. But not ordinary military installations. These showed structures that didn't make sense. Buildings with strange geometric configurations. Equipment that looked more like scientific apparatus than military hardware. Young men, teenagers, like Helmut, being trained with weapons, yes, but also with other things. Instruments, devices, technology. The Wunderwaffe project, Werner said quietly. The Wonder Weapons program. Specifically, the Specialized Division. The division tasked with creating soldiers who could operate weapon systems that were ... ahead of their time. Soldiers who could be trained to think in ways that ordinary conscripts couldn't be trained to think. Helmut's hands began to tremble. Not from fear, but from shock. The Americans knew. How did they know? How long were you in the program? Werner asked. 1 year, sir. And what specifically were you trained in? Helmut looked at the photographs, at the installations, at the young faces of the other participants in the program. I can't say, sir, even now, even as a prisoner. That information it's beyond classification. Which is precisely why I need you to tell me. Because if it's dangerous, then we need to know about it. All of it. Outside the tent, American guards stood watch. Inside the tent, a 16-year-old prisoner sat across from an intelligence officer who somehow knew about a program that wasn't supposed to exist. The war was over. The Reich was gone. But the secrets remained. Helmut made a choice. It wasn't made from courage or ideology or any higher principle. It was made from exhaustion. From the understanding that secrets had killed people. That the program, whatever it truly was, had consumed years of his life, and in the end it placed him in a bunker at Aachen with a rifle and no ammunition. The program was called Project Aurora, Helmut said. We were trained to operate experimental weapon systems. Systems that used principles of physics that weren't in the standard military curriculum. We were trained to think in ways that would allow us to understand how to use these systems, how to integrate them into combat operations. Werner's expression didn't change, but he made a notation. What kind of weapons systems? Directed energy systems, sir. Beam weapons. Systems that could project energy at targets at a distance. Systems that Helmut stopped. He couldn't continue. Systems that could do what? Werner pressed. Systems that could change warfare, sir. Systems that could make conventional military operations obsolete. Werner closed the folder. He stood. "Thank you, Helmut. You've been very helpful. You'll be transferred to a secure facility. You'll continue to be treated according to the Geneva Conventions. But you will not have contact with other prisoners. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Because what you've told me today? This information needs to go all the way to Washington. All the way to the very top. And before that happens, we need to make sure you're safe. Because there are people on both sides who would very much like to know what you know. And some of those people would prefer you never told anyone." As Helmut was escorted out of the tent, he understood something that hadn't been clear before. His capture hadn't ended his role in the war. His capture had transformed it. He was no longer a soldier. He was now a source. A resource. A living piece of intelligence that the Americans had acquired, and that meant his value would only increase as understanding of what he knew became clear. The war was over. But for Helmut Altmann, something else had only just begun. The secure facility wasn't a prison camp. It wasn't a military barracks. It was something in between a compound that had once been a German industrial research facility, now converted into an American interrogation and intelligence-gathering center. The Nazis, in their methodical way, had built it well. Concrete walls, multiple levels, underground sections. It was the kind of building designed to withstand bombardment, and the Americans had simply repurposed it for their own ends. Helmut was housed in a single room on the third level. Not a cell, exactly. There was a bed, a desk, a chair, a small window with bars and a view of nothing but sky. The door locked from the outside. There was a guard positioned outside at all times. It was imprisonment disguised as accommodation. He was alone, completely alone, not allowed to communicate with other prisoners, not allowed to receive visitors, not allowed to do anything except exist and wait. The interrogations continued, but they evolved. No longer was it Major Callahan with his administrative questions. Now his specialists. Men who understood physics. Men who understood experimental weapon systems. Men who understood the theoretical underpinnings of directed energy applications. They came in rotation, each one asking more precise questions than the last, each one taking his answers and feeding them into a larger intelligence apparatus that Helmut could only imagine. What was the power output? Helmut didn't know, but he could describe the size of the generators. What was the effective range? Helmut didn't know the exact specifications, but he could describe the training scenarios. What was the targeting system? Helmut had only been trained on a simulator, but he could describe what he'd seen in demonstration. Days blended into weeks. Time became measured in interrogations rather than hours or days. Helmut lost track. The window showed the transition from spring to early summer. The sky stayed lighter longer. Flowers were blooming somewhere outside the compound, and Helmut could sometimes catch the scent of them through the bars. A reminder that the world outside continued, indifferent to the secrets being extracted from a 16-year-old prisoner in an underground interrogation facility. Then one morning, a guard came to his room with a different instruction. "You have a visitor," the guard said. The guard's name was Pritchett. He'd been kind in the way that Americans could be kind offering cigarettes, which Helmut didn't smoke, coffee, which Helmut drank gratefully, small courtesies that made captivity marginally more bearable. "A visitor?" Helmut asked. "From where?" "That's above my pay grade, kid," Pritchett said. "Come on." They walked through corridors that Helmut had never seen before. Upper levels, offices, not interrogation rooms. At the end of a hallway, there was a conference room with a table and chairs and a woman sitting at the table. She was American. That much was immediately obvious. She wore no military uniform, but she had the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. She was maybe 45. Her hair was dark, streaked with gray. Her eyes were sharp, the kind of sharp that suggested she'd spent her entire Life assessing people and making judgments about them in microseconds. Leave us, she said to Pritchett. Ma'am, I'm supposed to. I said leave us. I'm sure you have other duties. Pritchett looked uncertain, but he left. The woman gestured to the chair across from her. So Helmut, he sat. My name is Dr. Eleanor Rothstein, the woman said. She had a slight accent, Eastern European maybe. I work for the Office of Strategic Services, the OSOPS. You've heard of it? No, ma'am. No reason you would have. We're American military intelligence. We're the people who deal with things that are ... complicated, classified, strategically important. She opened a folder. Not the same folder that Colonel Werner had shown him. A different folder. This one contained photographs and documents in German. I've read your interrogation reports, she said. I've read what you've told our specialists about Project Aurora. I've read the technical specifications you've been able to provide. And I have to tell you, Helmut, what you're describing is remarkably sophisticated. Almost too sophisticated for 1945. Almost like it came from somewhere else. Helmut didn't understand what she meant. Came from where? He asked. That's what I'm hoping you can tell me, Rothstein said. Because here's the problem, Helmut. The weapons systems you're describing, the directed energy technology, the beam weapons, the systems that could allegedly change the nature of warfare, we can't find them. We've inspected every facility associated with the Wunderwaffe project. We've captured the scientists. We've seized the documentation, and we find nothing. No prototypes. No functional systems. No evidence that these weapons ever existed beyond theoretical discussions and planning documents. She leaned forward slightly. So either the Nazis destroyed everything before we captured them, or the weapons never actually existed. They were fantasies. Science fiction dreams that Hitler's regime invested resources in without ever achieving results. They existed, Helmut said. It came out more forcefully than he intended. I trained on them. I saw them. Did you? Rothstein's expression didn't change. You trained on simulators, Helmut. You saw demonstrations. But did you ever see an actual weapon system in operation? Did you ever see one fire? Did you ever see the effects? Helmut's certainty wavered. He thought back to his training. The classrooms where instructors had lectured on theory. The simulators, yes, definitely simulators, where he'd practiced operating targeting systems that might or might not have represented real technology. The demonstrations where senior scientists had shown films that could have been real or could have been fabricated. I wasn't given access to operational systems, Helmut admitted slowly. We were theoretical operators. We were trained to understand how to use the systems if they became available. Exactly, Rothstein said. You were trained for a contingency that may never have occurred. You were part of an expensive research program that existed to explore possibilities. And you were good at it. The reports say you had exceptional aptitude for the theoretical physics components. Which is interesting, Helmut, because according to your background file, you're the son of a mathematics professor. Your mother was a physicist. You grew up in an intellectual environment. Helmut said nothing. It was true. His father had taught mathematics at Munich University. His mother had worked in theoretical physics before marrying and focusing on family. They were both gone now, captured during the Soviet advance into Bavaria, their fates unknown. The reason I'm telling you this, Rothstein continued, is because I need you to understand something. The weapons may not have been real, but the knowledge, the theoretical knowledge, the understanding of what might be possible, that's real. That's valuable. And that's why both the Americans and the Soviets are actively recruiting German scientists right now. We're in a race, Helmut. A race to acquire the intellectual capital that Germany accumulated over the past 12 years. What do you want from me? Helmut asked. I want you to work with us, Rothstein said simply. I want you to help us understand what the German scientific establishment was attempting to achieve. I want you to help us identify which scientists are worth recruiting, which facilities had genuine research potential, which programs were real and which were propaganda. In exchange, we'll ensure your safety. We'll ensure your future. We can arrange for you to attend university after the war. We can set you up in a new life, American life, away from Europe, away from all of this. She gestured around the room, the facility, the interrogation, the war that was still settling its dust across the continent. You're offering me asylum, Helmut said. I'm offering you a choice, Rothstein corrected. You can remain a prisoner of war. You can be repatriated to Germany after a period of detention. You can try to rebuild a life in a nation that's been conquered and divided. Or you can work with us. You can help us understand what happened here. And you can help us prepare for what comes next. What comes next? Helmut asked. Rothstein closed her folder. That depends on many things, Helmut. On what information we can gather. On what the Soviets learn. On what happens in the months and years ahead. But make no mistake, the war with Germany is over. Yes. But the conflict between ideologies? That's just beginning. The conflict between the Soviet Union and the West? That's about to define everything. And the scientific knowledge that Germany accumulated, especially knowledge about theoretical physics and advanced weapons systems, that's going to be at the very center of it all. She stood. You don't need to decide now. Think about it. I'll be back in a few days. When I return, I want you to have considered seriously what your future could look like if you choose to cooperate with us. As she was leaving, Helmut spoke. Dr. Rothstein? The weapons that directed energy systems. You said they might not have been real. But what if they were? What if there's one somewhere? Something the Nazis managed to hide before they fell? Rothstein paused at the door. Then, Helmut, that would be the most important discovery of this entire war. And it would explain a great deal about why both the Americans and the Soviets are so interested in acquiring German scientific knowledge. It would explain why we're willing to make deals with scientists who worked for the Nazi regime. It would explain why someone like you, a 16-year-old boy, suddenly becomes a person of extreme strategic interest. She looked at him directly. Sleep well, Helmut, and think very carefully about which side of this new conflict you want to be on when it heats up. She left. Helmut sat alone in the conference room, understanding that his capture had transformed him into something far more valuable and far more dangerous than anyone had initially realized. The question was no longer whether Project Aurora was real. The question was where it was hidden, and who else would kill to find it first. February 20th, 1945, 6:15 a.m., Iwo Jima, Day 2. Jacqueline Lucas wakes without remembering falling asleep. His eyes just open, and suddenly it's morning. The sky is gray-blue, that particular color that comes in the hour before true dawn. Around him, the other Marines are already stirring. Nobody slept. Everyone's eyes are open, red-rimmed, hollow with the kind of exhaustion that comes from adrenaline and fear, and the constant vigilance required to stay alive on an island where death is patient and thorough. Collins is already moving. He's checking the perimeter, walking from position to position, assessing the night's damage. There is none. They made it through their first night. In another few hours, thousands of other Marines will say the same thing, and some of them will be lying because they died in the darkness, and nobody noticed until dawn counted them. But Collins' squad made it. All 5 of them. Against odds that should have killed at least 3 of them. Eat, Collins says, and it's not a suggestion. He's handing out rations K-rations, the compressed meal packets that taste like cardboard mixed with salt and despair. Jacqueline eats because he knows he has to. His body needs fuel. His mind is already starting to fragment from exhaustion and shock, and fuel is the only thing that might hold it together. The radio crackles. It's Collins' platoon leader, Lieutenant Morrison. The voice comes through tinny and distorted, but the message is clear. All squad leaders, this is Able 1. We're moving out in 30 minutes. Objective is to establish forward positions along the ridge system. Division wants Mount Surabaki secured by end of day. All units maintain contact and report enemy positions. Out, Mount Suribashi. That dormant volcano that rises 546 feet above the beach. In the chaos of yesterday, in the shock of the landing and the first contact, Jacqueline hadn't really focused on the geography. But now, looking south toward the mountain, he understands what it means. Every Japanese position on this island will have observers on that mountain. Every Marine position is visible from that mountain. Control of Mount Suribashi means control of the entire island. That's impossible, Kowalski says. He's looking at the mountain, calculating the distance, calculating the enemy positions that must exist on it. There's no way we move from here to there in a day. Not with opposition. Not with the tunnels. Collins doesn't disagree. He just says, that's the order. We follow orders. We move when they tell us to move, and we secure what they tell us to secure. Whether it's impossible is not our concern. It's a Marine Corps' truth, but it's also a lie. It is their concern. It will become their concern. Because Iwo Jima is not about achieving the impossible. Iwo Jima is about taking losses so severe that the survivors start to question whether survival is even worth the price. They move out at 6:47 a.m. The beach is now crowded with landing craft, with supplies, with the material apparatus of an amphibious assault that's only just begun. Yesterday morning, Jacqueline watched the island from a transport ship. Now he's part of an invasion force that's becoming real, becoming entrenched, becoming something that can't be stopped unless the Japanese can push them back into the sea. But the Japanese can't push them back. The Japanese can only make the Marines pay for every inch of island they take. And the price, it turns out, is going to be extraordinarily high. Collins' squad moves with a larger unit, now a platoon of maybe 40 Marines. They're moving toward the ridge systems that form the interior geography of the island. Between the beach and those ridges is ground that should be open, that should be defensive, but it's not. It's pocked with cave entrances, hidden pillboxes, underground positions that the bombardment didn't touch. They've been moving for maybe 15 minutes when the first ambush happens. A Japanese position that they somehow missed, or that was missed by the units ahead of them, opens up with machine gun fire. The Marines scatter. Jacqueline finds himself behind a piece of corrugated metal that's twisted into a shape that provides almost no cover, but it's something. Danny is next to him. How many times is this going to happen today? As many as it takes, Jacqueline says, and he's surprised by how steady his voice is. Yesterday, he was 17 years old and scared. Today, he's 18 hours older and scared, but the fear has become familiar. It's become something he can function through. The suppressive fire from the Marines ahead starts to pin down the Japanese position. Collins signals the squad forward. They move in a crouch, weapons ready, moving toward the machine gun nest that's trying to kill them. By now, the pattern is familiar. Find the position. Flank it. Throw grenades. Move on. The Japanese die, or they retreat deeper into the tunnels. Either way, the Marines keep moving forward, but the cost is mounting. By the time they reach the ridge system at 10:30 a.m., they've lost 2 more Marines to sniper fire. One of them, a private named Morrison, no relation to the lieutenant, is hit in the stomach. He dies slowly, bleeding out in the black sand, calling for his mother in a voice that sounds nothing like a grown man should sound. Jacqueline watches this happen. He watches the Marines around Morrison try to stop the bleeding, try to apply first aid, try to save him. And he watches as the effort fails. Morrison stops breathing at 11:15 a.m. A corpsman checks for a pulse, shakes his head. They move on. The ridge system is defensible, and the Marines dig in. They're going to hold this position, while the units ahead of them continue to push toward Mount Suribachi. The word comes through the radio that elements of the 28th Regiment have already begun the assault on the mountain. By evening, flags will be flying on the summit. Flags, as if fabric planted on a mountain changes anything. As if the Marines who died to get there will care about the flags. Jacqueline doesn't think about this. He doesn't think about much of anything anymore. He digs a foxhole. He fills sandbags. He watches the perimeter. He waits for the next attack. And the next attack comes. 1:47 p.m. Japanese counterattack from the tunnels beneath the ridge. The ground shakes. Not from artillery, that's above them, happening miles away, but from explosions beneath the ground. Japanese soldiers are using the tunnel system to move beneath the Marines' position, trying to attack from underneath, trying to create chaos and confusion. Jacqueline feels it more than sees it. The ground literally trembles. Rocks fall from the ceiling of what used to be a natural cave formation. And suddenly, 20 yards away, the ground opens up and Japanese soldiers are coming out of the earth itself. Rifles crack. Grenades explode. The firefight is close quarters, brutal, the kind of fighting where you don't have time to aim. You just point your weapon and pull the trigger. You throw grenades and hope they detonate before they can be thrown back. Collins is shouting something. Jacqueline can't hear what it is. His ears are ringing again. There's blood on his face. He's not sure if it's his blood or someone else's. He fires his rifle. He counts the shots because ammunition is critical. 1 shot. 2 shots. He's aiming at a Japanese soldier who's maybe 20 feet away. The soldier is aiming back. They're locked in this moment, this terrible moment where one person's aim is better than the other person's aim. Jacqueline's aim is better. The Japanese soldier goes down, but 3 more are coming up out of the tunnel entrance. Jacqueline fires again. 1 of them goes down. The other 2 keep coming. Danny is beside him, firing. Williams is firing from another position. The sound is apocalyptic. The smell is overwhelming cordite, blood, the burnt metal smell of explosions in a confined space. And then, as suddenly as it started, it ends. The Japanese soldiers who made it out of the tunnel are either dead or retreating back down into the darkness. The Marines hold their fire, waiting to see if there are more. There aren't. Collins does a quick count. Everyone's still breathing. 2 Marines have wounds. Williams is bleeding from a shrapnel cut on his upper arm, and Kowalski has taken a graze wound to the ribs. But they're functional. They're alive. Did we get them all? Jacqueline asks. He's not sure why he's asking. Of course they didn't get them all. There are miles of tunnel. There are thousands of Japanese soldiers in those tunnels. This attack was just one probe, one attempt to disrupt the Marine positions. There will be more. We got the ones who came up, Collins says. The rest are still down there, and they're going to try again. They always try again. 4:30 p.m., late afternoon on Iwo Jima. The radio brings news. Mount Suribachi has been secured. American flags are flying on the summit. The photograph will become iconic. It will define this battle. It will show the world that America is winning, that the Marines are advancing, that Japan's days are numbered. But it doesn't feel like winning. It feels like holding on. The Marines have suffered nearly 3,000 casualties in less than 36 hours. They've taken maybe a quarter of the island. There are still 18 days of fighting ahead of them. 18 days of this. And the word secured is a military term that means we're holding it for now, but we don't know for how long. Jacqueline sits on the ridge as the sun starts to move toward the horizon. He's cleaning his rifle. The mechanism is clogged with volcanic sand. Everything on this island gets clogged with sand. Your rifle, your eyes, your ears, your mind. The volcanic sand infiltrates everything and makes everything harder to work with. He pulls the bolt back. He runs a cleaning rod through the barrel. He checks the firing mechanism. Everything is functional. The rifle is functional. And therefore Jacqueline Lucas is functional. A man is only as functional as his weapon. Danny sits next to him. Danny's not talking much anymore. None of them are. Words have become less important. Movement has become everything. The night is coming, and they'll take another watch. And if they survive the night, morning will come, and they'll move forward again. Toward Mount Suribachi, toward the interior of the island, toward the central positions where the main Japanese forces are dug in. My father told me something, Danny says, and his voice is quieter than it was yesterday. Quieter and older. He told me that war changes you, not in the way you think, not like you become brave or tough. He said war shows you what you already are, and that's the hardest part, seeing yourself clearly for the first time. Jacqueline doesn't respond right away. He finishes cleaning his rifle. He loads a fresh magazine. He sets the rifle across his lap. "What do you think you are?" he finally asks. Danny looks out toward the mountain, toward the flag, toward the terrain that's going to kill more of them tomorrow. "I think I'm the kind of person who's good at killing people when he has to," Danny says. "And that's something I'm going to have to live with for a very long time." The sun goes down. The second night on Iwo Jima begins. And Jacqueline Lucas, 17 years old, already responsible for the deaths of at least a dozen enemy soldiers, already containing more trauma than most men experience in a lifetime, closes his eyes and waits for morning. He doesn't know what's coming next. He doesn't know that in 7 more days, his life is going to change in a way that will define every moment that comes after. He doesn't know that he's going to do something extraordinary. He just knows that he has to survive until tomorrow. And then the next day. And then the next. The island isn't done with him yet. The island is just getting started.